Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the fascinating optical science of water clarity, specifically how we measure turbidity. And we're going to be looking at a lot of this through the lens of a brilliant, complete, cinematic lab experimental video presented by Dr. Chem on the determination of turbidity in water. It sounds simple on the surface, but the invisible physics working behind the scenes in every drop we test is absolutely incredible. Let's get right into it. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the meaning of turbidity, then the science of scattered light, setting the global standard, battling bubbles and color, and finally, why water clarity actually matters. All right, part one, the meaning of turbidity. So, the American Society for Testing Materials makes a really crucial distinction here. Turbidity isn't some inherent physical property of water, like temperature or pH. Nope, it's purely optical. It's literally all about how light behaves when it hits the liquid. Does the light beam shoot straight through, or does it scatter? In plain English, it's a measurement of water clarity, or rather cloudiness. We're detecting how much invisible suspended matter is just floating around in a sample. We're talking clay, silt, finely divided organic matter, or even microscopic organisms like plankton and algae. Basically, the more suspended solids you have hanging out in the water, the less clear it's going to be, because those particles physically block and scatter the light. Now, natural elements can completely change how a body of water looks, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's dirty with sediment. You'll often see these deep red and brown hues in natural waters. That's caused by colored dissolved organic matter, or sedum, which you'll usually find in bogs full of decaying vegetation. Depending on the exact plants or leaves steeping in there like tea, these dissolved substances color the water. They might be way too small to count in a standard suspended solids test, but they absolutely wreck water clarity. And the ecological impact of all this suspended matter is just massive. As these solids float down a river ecosystem, they soak up heat from the sun. That raises the water temperature, which, as a chain reaction, drops dissolved oxygen levels. That is a huge problem for sensitive cold water fish. Plus, less sunlight piercing the water means less photosynthesis for underwater plants. And eventually, all those solids settle to the riverbed, blanketing the bottom, smothering benthic microinvertebrates, and totally destroying fish eggs. Moving on to Section 2, the science of scattered light. Let's look inside a Nephelometer, which is the go-to instrument for measuring low turbidities. An intense beam of light is shot right up through a sample cell to illuminate the microscopic world inside. But notice where the detector is actually positioned. It's sitting at exactly a 90-degree angle to the incident light beam. So it isn't measuring the light shining straight through. It's specifically measuring the light bouncing off the suspended silts, clays, and algae. Basically, the higher the intensity of that scattered light hitting the 90-degree detector, the higher the turbidity of the sample. But how on earth do we know the machine is actually accurate? Well, to calibrate these super-sensitive instruments, scientists around the globe use a primary standard reference suspension called formazine polymer. The turbidity of a very specific concentration of this formazine is defined as exactly 4,000 Nephelometric Turbidity Units, or NTU. This gives labs everywhere a reproducible, unified baseline, so an NTU reading in one lab means the exact same thing as an NTU reading in another. Which brings us to Section 3, setting the global standard. Now, different regulatory bodies take totally different approaches to their light sources. The US EPA Method 180.1 relies on a tungsten filament lamp, which is a polychromatic white light. The major drawback here? It's highly sensitive to interference from colored water that absorbs light in the 400 to 600 nanometer range. On the flip side, the international standard, ISO 7027, uses an infrared LED emitting at specifically 860 nanometers. By using this longer infrared wavelength, the ISO method brilliantly bypasses the interference caused by dissolved colors in the water. It's a really clever workaround. But regardless of the instrument you're using, the procedure for analyzing a sample has to be followed perfectly because this equipment is incredibly sensitive. First, you collect the sample in scrupulously clean glass. Then, gently agitate it to disperse the solids, wait for every last bubble to vanish, and measure it immediately before particles can settle or change with temperature. Oh, and a quick side note, if you have a highly turbid sample, anything over 40 NTU, you can't just read it directly. You actually have to carefully dilute the sample with special turbidity-free water to bring it back into the instrument's accurate measurement range. All right, Section 4, battling bubbles and color. Operating these machines isn't just pressing a button and walking away. As we see in cinematic lab experiments like Dr. Chem's, technicians are constantly battling microscopic interferences. Anything that scatters or absorbs light artificially is going to create a bias in your final reading. For instance, true color, those dissolved substances we talked about, can absorb light, causing a negative bias where the turbidity reads too low. On the other hand, scratched glass vials, biological growth on sensors, or stray light bouncing around inside the machine can artificially increase the scatter for a false positive. But you know what the absolute biggest headache is for technicians? Bubbles. And we actually have to differentiate between two very specific types of bubbles here. And trained bubbles are the ones floating and moving dynamically within the liquid sample itself. Nucleated bubbles, though, are a completely different beast. These happen when a pressure drop or a temperature change causes dissolved gases to literally form and grow directly on the surfaces of the optical sensors. Think of it exactly like the sudden formation of carbon dioxide bubbles on the glass when you pop the cork on a bottle of champagne. Both of these bubble types will violently scatter light and completely ruin a reading. To fight this bubble menace, engineers have designed some brilliant physical workarounds, like the debubbling flow cell used in continuous water monitors. Instead of flowing straight to the sensor, the liquid is forced through a complex series of baffles. As the liquid snakes its way through this trap, those entrained bubbles are forced to rise, hit the surface, and burst out into the atmosphere long before they ever reach the optical sensor chamber waiting below.
Finally, Section 5, Why Water Clarity Matters.
So why do we actually care so much about a reading of 0.1 versus 0.5 NTU? Well, beyond just making sure our drinking water doesn't look dirty, maintaining extremely low turbidity is absolutely crucial because of what those particles can hide. Suspended colloidal material provides perfect absorption sites for harmful chemicals and weird tastes or odors. Even worse, these floating particles act like microscopic shields. They literally harbor and protect disease-causing waterborne pathogens from the disinfectants we use in water treatment. So turbidity directly dictates both the safety of the water and the sheer cost of treating it. Take the Yorugi River in Nigeria as a real-world example of this. Researchers studied it to see how particle size distribution impacts water quality. Now, the riverbed there is heavily dominated by sand, over 83%, and sand acts as a fantastic natural filter, which is great. But even that relatively small 16% proportion of silt is enough to create a musty, colloidal suspension in the water. The study found that particles larger than 5 micrometers were mostly responsible for the turbidity. But here's the really tricky part. Not all particles can even be detected by a turbidimeter. Some are just too incredibly small, falling right below the optical spectrum of the device. Yet they still present inherent health risks that have to be managed during treatment. It truly leaves you wondering, doesn't it? The next time you turn on the faucet and fill a clear glass from the tap, take a second to appreciate it. Think about the vast, largely invisible optical engineering, the infrared LEDs, the perfectly angled 90-degree detectors, the baffled debubblers, and the meticulous lab experiments like Dr. Chem's, working tirelessly behind the scenes so every single drop you consume is pure, clear, and perfectly safe. So how many unseen particles did a beam of light have to find to guarantee your water is safe today? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking questions about the hidden science all around you.